Sweet. Okay, so now it's recording. So good to go?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So super delighted to have my friend Alex here today. Hi, Alex.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah. So in the past, I've spoken to Alex a lot about this community thing, and she's one of the few people who brings a perspective that I really welcome, because it's a perspective on one, a certain pace and a certain slowing down before we all go build the new paradigm and the regenerative communities of tomorrow. But it also comes from a level of your experience, seeing some of the difficulties in the actual community part, and how the invisible structures of a community work. So before a group of people or any kind of community comes together to live together or co-create together, there's a level of communing and a level of really having those relationships work, having businesses work, things like that. So I'm excited to have this conversation with you today. And yeah, maybe you could give us a little bit of your background.
Yeah. So I'm Alex, sometimes Alexandra, playing with what name fits me the most these days. And I came to where we're at right now, where we're sitting at right now, from a lot of different experiences, but I think probably the most recent ones would be I've been working for the past, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years in the sphere of social change, international development specifically, and going to a lot of places and thinking that I have a solution for this place, for this problem, whatever. But then also seeing that, like, even though I would think like, oh, this is the solution, we give people mosquito nets and then malaria stops, but then this like new problem pops up, and and ultimately I really was left with the feeling that, like, it feels almost like there is no solution, that actually what we have in our world is forces. Some we would classify as like more difficult to feel, and some are more positive to feel, and actually recognizing the existence of those forces and working with them, instead of trying to say that, like, we're going to change them into something that we want, which is ultimately about our control. And I came to this, like, I was flying all over the world doing projects in, like, Africa, Asia, like, whatever, working with all the, like, big NGOs and design agencies and all that. Super fun, very, like, exciting. But never, I used to say I did social change for money, because I just never really felt like it was creating real change. And then I started on my own kind of personal journey of looking at myself through therapy, through plant medicine, through, like, different modalities. And when I started actually turning inwards and being like, how do I want to be in the world? Like, how do I have to act to create the world that I want to be in? And started changing myself and the way that I connected with people, the way that I thought about myself, the way that I thought about the world in general. And then this kind of, like, effortless change started happening around me, particularly in, like, relationships with people, also in, like, my career, all of it, like, things just started to align more, because I wasn't looking out there for how things should be. I was trying to actually embody how I wanted to be. And then it kind of just aligned. And so that, seeing this observation and meeting other people that had similar experiences, I was like, okay, I want to share this with people. And that's kind of where Inteliki came from. The project that I'm currently running was the desire to share this with people, and also realize that, like, I don't have any of the answers around this. This is an ongoing, eternal experiment, and really just wanting to play with other people while we look at these things that usually we don't talk about, because it makes us a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, because there's an unknown. I think people always want a consultant or an agency to solve this problem or help me solve this problem. But to actually navigate the unknown together is a beautiful thing, and see what comes up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what are, yeah, I guess from the projects, you were telling me the other day, like you've worked with some interesting companies and others to kind of prototype some of these things. What are, especially if we think about it from the lens of, like we're both in Costa Rica now, but people wanting to either create a community or live in a community, what would be some of kind of the practical outtakes or the things that have come out of the work you've been doing recently that would be relevant, you think, to share?
Yeah. I was just talking to a friend, and he kind of summed up like what I'm trying to do pretty succinctly. It's almost like reprogramming our social algorithms a bit. It's like we all came from structures and systems that embedded certain like ways of being within us, whether that's like the trauma that's gotten handed down intergenerationally, whether it's, you know, a focus on productivity as like the way that we create value in the world. And so like those of us that are trying to like shift into a way, I'm trying to avoid words like paradigm and all that, like a way of being that feels more aligned with the larger system of the planet that we're in. We can't do that while we're carrying inside of us all of these ways of being that have been handed down to us and that we've learned. So there's like a part of it that's really like deprogramming ourselves. And how we can start that is by actually like questioning like the beliefs that we hold. So what I've been doing is creating spaces where it's safe and we feel like the trust needed to begin to do that. And so even before we move to like looking at community, we have to look at ourselves, because like, you know, there's like an old adage where it's like, oh, if you don't love yourself, you can't love other people. But it's so true, you know. So if we're not in right relation with ourselves internally, we really can't do anything with community, because it's just going to be a reflection of our internal world, because everything is a reflection of our internal world. So we kind of begin the process with that. It's like, okay, and sometimes you're like, oh my God, I don't want to, like, there's no reason to think about that, whatever. It's like, none of it is gone. Like your entire reality is created by your experiences, your thought patterns, etc. Like there is no objective reality. So when we start like asking the questions, and not being afraid of the answers, and and then we also see that everyone else is actually having the exact same experience as us. That for me was a big thing. Like for a long time, I was like, I'm the only one with low self-esteem. And then I started talking about it. I was like, oh my God, we all have this. And it becomes way less scary. And I think actually those conversations are the basis for a strong community, is like when people stop feeling like they need to hide these things that they feel like are somehow shameful, and you can actually talk about them together. That builds like a whole different level of bonding with people. And then as far as like moving into community, it's really bringing awareness into the thought patterns that are coming up for us as we are moving into community, and working with those on an internal level, but also working with like, okay, you know, in the experiment that we ran in Portugal, it was like this 10-day like immersive experience. We started with our inner worlds, and we created rituals that helped us practice ways of being that were aligned with how we want to be. And like this could be anything from like meditation to like dancing, like whatever keeps you open. And then as a community, we did the same thing. It was like, you know, we would talk about a lot of values, like, okay, we want to be in connection, we want to be, you know, authentic, etc. But like, what actual practices are we putting in place to do that on a daily basis? So we created like a whole community ritual that every day people would do together. And, you know, some of it was this thing called dyad meditation, where you sit in pairs and you just witness each other, answering questions about like what you're feeling in that moment. And the other part of it was really realizing like, when we tried to do stuff together, like we were going to build a cooking system, right? Which should be like a very simple thing, but it's really like as complex as anything else. It brings up people's egos. It brings up, you know, what role do I play in this? It brings up, health, it brings up economics, it brings up everything. So we created that together. And one of the like big realizations for me was like, we feel when we get a task, we feel like, oh my God, we all have to do it. Like, let's move, let's do it. We got to create. And nobody knows exactly what we're doing. And this is something I feel a lot when we talk about like, oh, we want to build like a new earth or a new paradigm. It's like, but what is that? You know what I mean? Like when we're working together, we need to get real clear on that, because even words like connection to me probably means something totally different than what connection means to you. And so there's space, there needs to be spaces where all of that is brought to the fore, and we go slow because, you know, a lot of times it's like, this is just something we tick off. Let's spend 10 minutes on this. We write a mission statement, put it on the wall, but that mission statement actually means something totally different to each member of the group. And then like 3 months down the line, like people are defecting because they're not feeling represented. They're not feeling heard. So like when we spend the time to really actually create that shared reality, and it needs to be a continuous process, because resentment is like the devil of community, you know. And if people don't feel, if you don't have the rituals in place to help people continuously feel safe to express when they are feeling resentment, and also if you don't have the personal work in place to know what resentments actually need to be brought to the group versus something that you should be dealing with in your own space that has to do with triggers in your past or whatever, then it gets real messy real quick. And so we think like we can just skip all these things, but they don't go away. They just come back later and end up being the things that destroy a lot of projects.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right on that, which is one, in the beginning, I think just people knowing how to presence really well what they're feeling and what's going on in their world before, you know, kind of dealing with collective issues. I think it's just even in a neighborhood, before even getting into an eco-village, like we live in the neighborhood of Nosara, you notice how difficult it is for people to really, really speak their truth, you know? And really have activities where they can presence with each other and share things, because sometimes people live in this like bubble. Everything's good, we're here on the beach, and then no, like most of these people have deep pains and deep things, and if they're real with each other, then then things like resentment don't build up, and other, you know, because I think also you have these you know, kind of age-old, you know, millions of years of genetic patterning in us of like conditioned responses and different things. And so somebody says something, somebody else reacts to something because it's an instant, you know, that this mind does its thing. And it's like, oh, this is a threat to me, or a threat to what I think community should be like, or, oh, I don't want to have a polyamorous community. This is a threat. This is crazy. But nobody really knows how to talk to each other first, or have the exercises just to feel each other, to communicate. So I think that's a huge thing. And then also, like I noticed, I sat in on, when I came to Costa Rica, I sat in on some HOA meetings of eco-villages, or of one eco-village in specific. And I'm just gonna get a little closer so I get out of the shadow. And and I noticed like there was things also that I didn't think had a solution. Like I heard people arguing about whether the HOA money, the homeowners association money, should go to the garden or the school. And someone who doesn't have kids is like, of course, the garden, you know, in some cases. And so I was like, wow, these are tough problems. Or like one person was complaining because they wanted, in Costa Rican law, you have to build a wall around what they call a condominium, like a gated community. And one person said, I didn't move here from Canada to live in a prison, you know. And another lady was saying, yeah, but right now it's just a cow fence with barbed wire, and my kids are running out into the public street, and there's cars and workers. And I'm like, holy shit, these people are never going to reach resolution. You know, something here is not going to work. And then I was kind of depressed because I was like, wow, how's that going to work? And a couple of years later, I noticed that everything kind of balanced out. That person who was like gung-ho about not having the wall ended up moving out of the community. Actually, around 30% of the people in that specific community moved out, and another group moved in. So I guess things can kind of balance themselves out as well, naturally, which is pretty rad, you know? Oh, did we lose you, Alex?
Yeah, and I
There you
think
are.
a lot of
No, I got you now. You're back. Yeah.
that's
Oh, I'm going to click pause for a second. All right, we're back.
okay, cool. Yeah, and it's interesting because like those type of conversations, like if we're looking at an external solution, there actually is no external solution because you're actually having an emotional conversation, you know, and it's like the thing is not about the fence. The thing is about somebody feeling unsafe and the other person also feeling unsafe, but for different reasons. And so you can actually go round and round and argue about the fence forever, or it can be like, I'm feeling unsafe. And, you know, we were raised in a society, and like, I'm a prime example of this. I spent most of my life like stuffing my emotions. So in the past couple of years, am I like, oh, these are important.
Mm-hmm.
And I've found, you know, with my partner, you know him, but like when we talk, when we try and work things out from a place of like the head, you know, we can just go round and round and round for hours. But when we actually get down to like, I feel scared, immediately there's like connection. We can talk about that. And so, you know, in the experiment and other like, and life and also other things, it's like, what we saw is a lot of the work, like a lot of times we think like, oh, we need to design the tool, you know, like we need to design the tool that will solve the problem. Like, and one of the examples from the experiment was like, we were trying to figure out like how to have the cooking system and then who's going to clean. And originally we're like, the tool is we'll assign 2 people every day and that's how we're going to clean and like blah, blah. And I was like, okay, but this is the way we always do things. Like, why don't we ask ourselves, like, why are we actually doing this, you know? And what we realized was that we wanted to create this rigid structure that actually didn't really help us because we didn't want to have to talk to each other. We didn't want to have to say to each other, like whoever's supposed to clean didn't want to have to say that day, or we didn't have to just want to have to talk about every day, like who's going to clean, because then we would actually have to assert our needs and hear other people's needs. And that felt really uncomfortable. But we decided, because we're in an experiment, we're like, let's just try that. Let's just try having no structure. And, you know, we have this environment of trust and experimentation together. And so we were just able to have conversations. And what resulted was, you know, like one day, like 2 people were supposed to do it at lunch. One woman just decided to do the entire lunch so the other guys could rest. And then they did the entire dinner so she could rest. And it just worked out way better. Like people got what they needed in a, you know, in a much more adaptive way. And I kind of had this moment like watching that, and I was like, oh my God, we do that with everything. Like so many of our structures are created so like we don't actually have to talk to each other, but then we get trapped in these rigid structures that don't adapt to our needs. And for me, I think, you know, a lot of regeneration has to do with kind of more mimicking living systems, right? And living systems don't have like rigid rules like that. They're dynamic, they're constantly changing, growing, adapting. And so I think for us humans, there's so much work to create environments of trust and communication where we actually really don't need that many tools, because we'll find the right tool in the moment as long as we have that trust and communication to be able to do it.
Oh, I love that. And I love that aspect of mimicking the natural world, which is dynamic and evolving versus rigid and preset. Like this is, yeah, and a lot of the legal structure of community and a lot of the decision-making structure of community is pretty rigid. You know, it's like, this is it. This is, we vote once a month on that. But actually maybe rethinking some of, well, I know a lot of groups are working on this now, but governance structures and similar to DAOs and, you know, decentralized organizations and how they make decisions. But yeah, I think that's a big takeaway too, to be able to have dynamic processes. Maybe I want today to wash the dishes, but tomorrow I need a day off. I'm just feeling tired, you know, or something. So.
Yeah, and the more, like what I've seen is the more you have the trust, the less processes you need.
Yeah, and how do you see that developing, like that trust?
So, because I think right now, what I've seen in myself and my work and like a lot of other people is we put so much focus on the tool. Even the DAO is a tool, you know, governance for all of its tools, voting is a tool, even doing like a forum is a tool.
Yeah.
But really it's like, if we shift that energy and that focus, you know, to creating spaces where trust is built continuously. And that's actually the focus of our, you know, group, is to create those spaces. And then the other stuff, the organization of like how we work together, how we're going to do stuff, that just happens a lot more smoothly. And so the more we focus on like people really deeply trusting each other, feeling seen and heard, then everything else just kind of falls into place. And that's what I've seen in general with this work, is like when I really focus on myself showing up the way that I want to show up, everything else just kind of falls into place. When we focus as a group, really embodying how we want the world to be together, everything else just kind of falls into place. So there's a lot less need to focus on the way that like things should be out there, and it's more like between myself and between us.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially in a lot of cases, whether it's a neighborhood or an eco-village, most of these people are coming from all over the world and don't know each other. In some cases, I've seen now like groups of friends wanting to get land together or join an existing project together. And that's cool because they're a community that, you know, Burning Man camp is something that, okay, we've already gone through a lot of shit together, you know, and but I think it's quite difficult. There's two difficult parts I see. One is when it's a lot of random people from all over the world who have never been together. Well, yeah, sure, they share a set of values, sustainability and different things. Now they all bought land in an eco-village and they're like, cool, we're gonna eco-village. And I'm like, maybe, let's see how this works, you know? So I think that's one difficulty, and I think that's one area where, especially with the work you do, I think it'll be beneficial because, yeah, a lot of these things are already happening where maybe it's not ideal that way, but yeah, 90 different people from 40 different countries bought lots in an eco-village and now, you know, want to have a feeling of community, but they're going to have to do exercises and work together and presencing and all sorts of stuff. There's another part that I want to talk to you about, and I know we could probably have a whole nother call about this, but you know, the biggest criticism I've had recently from people looking at countries like Costa Rica and the whole, yeah, like you're saying, not to say the words, but like regenerative, new paradigm, whatever it is, movements that are happening, you know, alternative living, is there's been a sense of neo-colonialism and class division that's crazy. Very few projects are meaningfully integrating locals, other than giving some local like discounts on lots. But again, it's not really integrating locals or local culture or indigenous culture. And a lot of it is actually too late. Like in a place like Nosara, for example, there's already a huge wealth and class division. There's like the haves and the have-nots, and there's big walls built on mansions. And now there's a lot of like petty theft and crime starting to emerge. And so while like it's really beautiful that I have friends who are building eco villages in the mountains somewhere, you know, the town of Guiones is now all Canadians and Americans pretty much, very few locals. And the crime already is here. It's starting to exist. Yeah, so what do you think, at least looking forward, like what we can do to, yeah, to, I don't want to say solve it, but to start to integrate more and to start to create something more holistic where it's not that case. And to play devil's advocate, a lot of Ticos I talked to said, man, some of the best things that have happened in this country are because foreigners are here. It's also been a land bridge of the Americas for years and years and years, where cultures from South and North America have mixed, you know, and crossed this trade route. So it's always been a place where foreigners are here, but yeah, you see more and more indigenous culture disappearing, and people ask me about that a lot, and I'm like, I don't know, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, first I want to flag the like intergenerational nature of what we're doing, because the idea is to like, let's shift the course of this ship a little bit. And we're working with thousands and thousands of years of trauma and different power structures that have been handed down. So for me, that's helped a lot, really realizing like this isn't going to get to the spot where I would like it to get in my lifetime. My job is to make whatever small steps forward that I can make as a human. So I think that's important to think about. And then the other thing is like really, I think that and it's not as easy, like as you just mentioned, it's not as black and white as like people coming down here and buying land is bad. Like there's benefits and trade-offs and everything. So nothing is good or bad. But I think that there is what I've seen that I think is probably something that I struggle with more are projects that want to say that they're doing that type of work of integration without doing the work. And I think we have to recognize that it is work. You're talking about, and it really requires slowing down. And so that, you know, you could like, and nothing like, if you miss the boat on not doing this at the beginning of the project, it doesn't mean like you can't do it. Like you can always, you know, there's a quote that says the best time to plant a tree was 50 years ago. The second best time is today, you know? So like, there's always things that we can add in, you know? But I do think if I were to be planning to do an eco village, like there's actually a period of like listening with the community and sensing with the community and really meeting them and like understanding like what are the dynamics of this community, because we also tend to romanticize local communities, like, oh, everyone loves each other, it's great, they have their own shit, you know.
They have their own shit.
It's like what's going on here, how to engage, how to like understand and work with the power structures and also disrupt them if there's oppressive power structures in place. But you know, really that takes time. And if you didn't do it before your project, you can do it once your project's already there. But like there needs to be like a commitment to actually doing that type of work, and then going above and beyond stuff like, okay, we'll do like an event for Ticos, or they can get lower prices or whatever. And some of that might actually shift your dream, you know? And I think that's sometimes the challenge is like, you know, I do this as well. I get really fixated on this is how it has to be the thing that I want it to be. And I think the more that we're open to new information shaping the thing, because that's actually the reality in which we're existing, the better. So like being able to say like, okay, like we didn't understand this dynamic when we got here, but that's something we want to work with. Okay, we're going to shift the way that we thought about our project a bit to be able to really work with local people. And so I think it's a lot of that. Like there's definitely no like silver bullet solution for anything. It's very place-based, it's very local people based.
And assuming also that local people want to integrate, that's the other thing, like with foreigners. Like I have a lot of Tico friends and their culture is quite different and they like to hang out and do things differently. So to say like, hey, let's all integrate. Yeah, they see like a lot of my friends, like it's great, everyone's running around doing plant medicine and this and that, but like that's like we just want to hang out, have a beer, like chill, you know. So it's not always like such a dreamy thing where it's like, oh yeah, let's integrate local people, but like do local people want to integrate with what you're up to? And I even having like our own retreat center and etc. in the past, I was like, wow, this was still a lot for foreigners. And I somehow assumed that like if we opened it up for the town, which we did on a lot of the nights, but I was like, oh, people are going to drink beer and smoke cigarettes and get the place like, you know, it'd be different somehow if we just opened the place up to people in the town, you know, all the time. And now, some years later, you know, it is like that where local people come to eat at a restaurant that we have there and eat local foods. It's not just all vegan, like they like to eat meat and this and that. And yeah, nothing got trashed, nothing's different, but the culture is completely different from when we have foreigners there, retreat groups there. And so it's funny, like I was like, wow, what would it be like if, because we had this part of the land that was supposed to be for an eco village. I was like, what would it be like if this was just the eco village for locals or just a community for locals, like not even integrating with foreigners? And the only thing that's difficult to explain is to the investors or to people who are putting money in, because they're not going to get the same ROI, you know. And so one of my friends now bought like 500 hectares to do a bigger project where yeah, they're going to have their part that's like the classic thing of like people from abroad living, but they're going to have a part, like a huge area where it is for local people, that they don't have to integrate the two. They could just be living in the same general project or whatever you call it, like master plan thing, village, etc. But yeah, like the people who work there, the people who are the farmers, the people who are the builders, they want to be around their peeps and they need an affordable, beautiful place to live. And so they're doing that now, and they're starting to figure out ways of how to make that work. But yeah, it's still a challenge. I've just seen like some of the challenges come down to money and investors and people wanting ROI and things like that. Others are cultural differences. So it's I think something to take slowly and observe and see how we could do it. But
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think there's two things that you brought up that I wanted to comment on. I think also probably the most effective thing that you could do is go out and make friends. Like sometimes we just complicate this so much. It's like, okay, I need to have this plan of how I'm going to integrate the locals and like blah, blah, blah. It's like if you actually go out and make friends, learn the language, get to know the people, have no agenda about the project, show up as your authentic self. I think the rest of it actually just emerges. It will become quite clear how to proceed once you do that. But I think it's, you know, it's the same sort of thing where it's like, oh, I'll just make community. And it's like, okay, but how does that actually happen? Personal relations, I'll integrate the locals. How does that actually happen? You have to know the locals, you know? So it's like,
Yeah.
I wouldn't skip that step. You know, it's like, I would actually really try and create the human connection. And then the other thing with the investors, I think that it's important in this movement that people go to bat for different values with investors, because if we're all just getting money without doing that, just money so that we can have the most money possible to do whatever we want, that for me is very much the same way it's always been done. So it's like, I think that people who are wanting to build different systems need to be defending that throughout the entire process, from like the supply chain to like where the money comes from to everything. And that's why it's really helpful to have a really clear vision of like what you're actually doing and why you're doing it. And then it's not just about the space, you know, with my business, like as I'm building Inteliki right now, it's like, I need to integrate the values that I want to see in the world into my organization, and it needs to be everywhere. It can't just be in the external facing offer. It needs to be in like the meetings we have. It needs to be in like the way that we hire people. It needs to be in our contracting. Like it needs to be in the way that we choose projects. Because there's always going to be the opportunity to just go for opportunities, you know? And it's like, if we want to be differently, we have to be differently all the time, not just when it's shiny and nice, you know, behind the closed doors as well.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. And also that it's nice in terms of taking the time to make friends, taking the time to plan out projects. I feel like people come here with unrealistic timelines, or also like in general, even from a good place, they're like, wow, the world's going to shit. We need to rebuild it right away. And it's hundreds of years of the old paradigm, thousands, to then say, okay, now we want to build the new one quickly. And I have one friend here who bought land, who's been sitting on his land for 3 years, you know, seeing like what's going on. And I always joke about it because he's like, this year I'm putting up a bench, you know, just to see how the water moves in the land. But everyone else that I see, I don't know if it's for what reason, if it's for money or ego or this, but everyone's in such a rush, you know, like, let's do this, let's move. And I get it, but also just to take it a little slower, make friends, talk to your local community, talk to each other, and really plan out as much as you can intentionally, and even replan and retool some of what you had in your mind and heart before you go out and do it, you know? And also for individual families. Like I have a lot of friends who are like, oh, should we go buy land in an eco village, or should we just go buy a piece of land in a cool town, like in Chiripo or Nosara? And I'm like, yeah, you really have to feel that out, but go stay, go like live in a house there for a while, see what you want, you know, how you want to live, with who. Maybe we don't all have to live in an eco village. Maybe a neighborhood is a great thing and it's already integrated. There's locals, there's foreigners, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think if people slowed down a lot and really took the time, it would be a lovely, lovely future.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about like, well, a lot of what we're seeing that actually seems to work as far as like things that are helping us be more in alignment with the planet, right? Like if you look at like different types of agriculture, all of that, it's actually like shifting us more into alignment with the rhythms of nature. And as humans, like essentially we're rewilding humans a little bit, right? We want to rewild ourselves. And I've had the same experience coming down to Costa Rica. I was living in Barcelona for 3 years before coming down here. And I came down here and like I got off the plane and I was like, I need to do, you know, it's like I need to get my business going. Everything needs to happen right away, because there was this fear in my body of like stopping, of like what happens if I slow down. And I think it's important for us to examine when we get that feeling, like where is that coming from? And also examine the things that we say we want. Like, do I want to live in an eco village because I really want to live in community, or do I want to live in an eco village because something about my ego likes the idea of living in an eco village? And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think the key is like being able to own that within ourselves and with each other, you know, and like, so I want to live in an eco village because it makes me feel good about myself. You know, I don't actually know how to be in community, but I want to do it. And it feels good. It feels good to tell people that. Cool. Let's have that conversation, you know, but it's like, we're doing that, but then we're not having that conversation. And then things kind of like explode. But so in general, all that to say is nature goes way slower than the way our modern society has been constructed. And so there's definitely a level of discomfort that comes from that, because I mean, think about it almost as like withdrawals, right? Like we're withdrawing from a way of being, and it's going to hurt a little bit and it's going to feel weird. And so I think the more that we push ourselves into areas where it actually feels uncomfortable and weird, and we force ourselves to wait when we want to act and actually like really feel things out, that is the transformation that we're seeking. I think sometimes, myself included, like I want it to be easy and feel good all the time, but that's not actually how transformation occurs.
That's a good reminder. I appreciate that. I'm even, you know, after January 1st, I ended up getting sick, and to take the beginning of the year slowly. And I was like, oh, I have all this action mode I want to do. Even me and you having this conversation, I was like, oh, I wanted to do it even last year. But I'm like, okay, everything at its own pace. It doesn't, but the body takes a little bit of reconditioning to that speed of just being. Yeah, and even in the presencing with people in that process, again, it's such a fast system that when we go into our slow system, it's delicious and we could start to really connect to each other. But I guess it does take a good amount of reprogramming. We come from societies and businesses and things where it's a totally different pace than nature's pace. So slowing the F down could be a great way in general as people, like individually, and then for doing projects and etc., just to come into a different rhythm and a different way of being.
Yeah, and the world is kind of stacked against us in that right now, and so I see myself as like an ambassador who struggles with it herself, but you know, and like I think we need ourselves to be the ambassadors. You know, we're always going to be told, especially if you take on investment, things have to be done in this timeline, and there's all this like noise around us saying that, you know, this other way of being is the way of being, and like everything has to be done super fast, otherwise this thing's going to happen. We don't know what it is, but it's bad. You know, and it is a lot of programming. It's not that noise will go away. But what I've found in my life is I'm able to detach emotionally from it. I might get pressure from people to do things on a certain timeline, and more and more I ask them why, like why is that timeline what it is? Why do we need to do this so fast? And I ask myself, why do I feel like I need to do this so fast? And the more that I, when I really pause and not jump into action, the more the synchronicity, the alignment stuff that I told you before, like things just kind of happening around me happens. When I jump in and try and control everything and make it the way that I want it to be on the time that I want it to be, it usually goes off the rails, and I become really overwhelmed and maybe cry.
I appreciate that honesty and truth, because that's what we need more of. Alex, although we could talk about this for hours and hours, and we will in the future talk more about the different subjects, if people wanted to work with you or reach out to you, how does Inteliki work, and what are you up to now with that?
Yeah, we've got a bunch of different modalities of how to work together, but also as like an emergent living system. If somebody has a really cool idea that we haven't thought of, as long as it's, kind of aligned with the things that we're trying to do in the world, then we're always open to hear it. But yeah, we create these containers, and the containers are essentially spaces where we work with stuff like this, where we help people kind of come into their own awarenesses about their own experiences and kind of uncover the dynamics that are going on and be able to work with them versus trying to fix them. And those can be live things that we do. They can be from like a couple of days to a couple of weeks to whatever people need. We also have like a blended online offline version. So if it's somebody on the other side of the world, we can work with them. And this is those are both better done with groups. And the blended online offline is like, we'll help you hold space for integration and help you kind of have the next steps of how you're going to work together. And then you guys will go off and do it on your own and come back, etc. And then for individuals who are wanting to just explore this in their own worlds, we can do coaching. And then we also do advising for projects that more just want to like spitball how they're currently doing this, or want us to help them set up a system that they can then go and run with.
Awesome. So it could be a community, it could be a company, it could be an individual. That's great. That's great. And I'll put your contact info and all that stuff. I'll just plaster it all over the internet. But yeah, we'll definitely make sure if someone who's listening wants to get in touch with you, they'll have a way to do it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, this is so fun. Thank you for sharing your time and your energy and your passion.
Yeah, thank you for inviting. A great time.
Yeah, amazing. All right, amigos. Ciao for now.